Hello Chipmunk and Chipette fans, my name is Grady Tamias, and welcome back to another Alvin and the Chipmunks anniversary retrospective. Now, had I been more prepared, I would have released this retrospective on the actual 20th anniversary of the Chipmunk movie in question, but since it's Halloween, and this year has been pretty different for this holiday, I thought I owed it to you, especially after last year where I forgot to do a 20th anniversary retrospective of Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this retrospective of Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman. Oh, and as with my other Chipmunk retrospectives, spoiler alert! As I would find out years after watching this movie, Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman was the second and final film in a short-lived partnership between Universal Studios and Bagdasarian Productions. As I explained in one of my elaborations last year about the lawsuit that ended their partnership, Universal was trying to make Alvin and the Chipmunks the child-friendly mascot of their studio, a la Mickey Mouse, with Disney. So they decided to cross the Chipmunks over with what they are perhaps best known for, the classic monster movies that they had been putting on the big screen for nearly 7 decades at that point. I first saw this movie around the age of 11 or 12, not sure exactly, but it was on a kids' channel that I was only able to reach through cable. Ah, cable, you will be remembered. I saw Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet Frankenstein a few years later on Netflix, and for a while I thought that one was the better of the two films, until my opinion switched back to Wolfman. And it seems like a large portion of the Alvin and the Chipmunks fanbase agrees that Wolfman is the better film, probably due to the more emotional moments with Theodore and the inclusion of the Chipettes, who were absent in Meet Frankenstein. Both films are also much darker in tone than the cartoon series from the 80s and 90s, but Meet the Wolfman I think uses it to much greater effect in a way that we wouldn't see again until the last act of Chipwrecked. I mean, this is actually the first time in the franchise where blood is shown. Twice, actually. Once when Mr. Talbot gets his finger cut on a thorn bush, and second when Theodore comes home with a wound on his hand from the werewolf biting him. And who could forget Alvin's nightmare in the opening sequence where a werewolf stalks him through the forest, and there's even a terrifying shot that lingers on a close-up of the werewolf's eye. Some people have been put off by these films for the fact that monsters exist in the Alvin and the Chipmunks 80s universe, if you consider the Universal films part of the same continuity as the cartoon, which I don't. But it has actually been a thing since some of the early 80s episodes. Like, there was one that ends with the reveal that the Seville house is haunted. And the Universal films wouldn't be the last time, since at least 2 episodes of the 2015 series have confirmed the existence of aliens. But it doesn't seem as unbelievable with Meet the Wolfman and Frankenstein, since they have the entire film's worth of runtime to establish the rules that these monsters still have to abide by in the Chipmunks universe. Granted, the whole werewolf biting another werewolf thing to cure Theodore and Mr. Talbot at the end of the film did seem a little contrived, but it's not egregious or anything, especially compared to the examples I mentioned earlier from the cartoons where an alien pops in and does alien stuff with barely any context to the episode. A few other things I want to mention before I move on and discuss specific moments in the film. There's actually a reference to another Universal monster, the creature from the Black Lagoon, which Alvin has a poster of above his bed near the beginning of the film. Part of the film's conflict is that Alvin is obsessed with Halloween monsters, which, if this were the more modern Alvinverse continuity, the equivalent would probably be Alvin having an obsession with lost tapes. Anyone remember that show on Animal Planet? It terrified 9-year-old me. I think they even did a werewolf episode. I'm getting off track. But I'll be coming back to other Universal monsters near the end of the video. The school that the Chipmunks attend, instead of it being named after Thomas Edison like it was in the 80s cartoon, they now attend Clyde C. Crash Cup Elementary, which brings up a whole bunch of questions about where or even who Clyde is in this continuity, which is all the more confusing when you consider Clyde's role in the time-traveling events of the 80s episode Back to Our Future. But yeah, I'm getting off track, and I'll probably have to dedicate an entire elaboration to who Clyde is eventually. Miss Miller kind of appears in this movie, but it's just her voice over the phone. I don't know why she didn't actually appear in any scenes. All she did was yell Dave's name like, "David!" after the Chipettes ran home screaming from the werewolf. Her voice actress, Dodie Goodman, wasn't even credited for the line, which is unfortunate. But speaking of voice acting, this film reunites Pinky and the Brain. Maurice LaMarche, the Brain, voices the film's antagonist, Mr. Talbot, while Rob Paulsen, Pinky, voices the director of the school play. Anyway, one of the highlights of this film is Theodore's relationship with Eleanor. It's not an outright romance between them. Sorry, all you Theodore shippers. Nothing against you, but the Chipmunk franchise has always done a good job of merely teasing the idea of the Chipettes and Chipmunks being each other's love interests in a way that really grounds them first and foremost as friends. Really, this film is about Theodore coming into his own while still maintaining who he should be. He starts to become more confident thanks to Eleanor helping him adjust to lead role in the school play, and he even returns the favor by gifting her with the amulet that Alvin had received when he bought the Monster Facts book. The amulet even serves a purpose near the end of the film when the sight of it breaks Theodore out of his savage trance while in his werewolf form, because it reminds him of his feelings for Eleanor. It all works out well for their friendship in the end, but getting to that point was not a straight road, and it all has to do with Theodore's character development after he's bitten by the werewolf. His increased strength and speed from becoming a werewolf make him really confident at first, allowing him to deliver a much more imposing performance for his play rehearsal, and the school bully stops picking on him. But afterwards, he starts to get really cocky and is a real jerk the way he treats everyone. Like, he's making remarks whenever someone tries to tell him what to do, he even ignores his closest friends and family when they try to help him, and pulls pranks on others, such as when he pulls down Alvin and Simon's pants right before the stage curtain opens and the audience sees them in their boxer undershorts. Theodore pretty much becomes like a meaner version of Alvin, as Eleanor later remarks in the film at one point. Moving on, one plot point, or part of a plot point, that I find odd is that Theodore develops a taste for meat about halfway through the movie, and Dave says soon after that Theodore doesn't eat meat, suggesting that Theodore is a vegetarian. But then later, during the song montage for The Monster Out in You, Theodore pulls a T-bone steak out of the fridge and eats it raw. I suppose Dave could have bought him the steak, but, well, it's been a matter of debate in the fandom, and I'll dedicate an entire elaboration to it eventually, but in real life, the Bagdasarian family are vegetarian, and it's unclear if that carries over to the fictional Seville family as well. So I'm quite surprised that Dave would even buy the steak at all. Probably the most curious thing that I found in my rewatch of this film was when Alvin and Simon go to see the person who plays Madame Rhea on the TV, and she says that a were-chipmunk is unusual but not unheard of. So this means prior to Theodore becoming a werewolf, there had at least been one other documented case of it happening to a chipmunk? What? I mean, remember, by this point they had stopped showing other chipmunk characters besides the Chipmunks and Chipettes. So, considering how few of them we see in the Alvin and the Chipmunks universe, it really makes me question a whole bunch of things. Last thing I want to mention, I know I haven't covered as many plot points with this film as I have in other retrospectives, but the school play was a nice way to work in parallels with the present situation going on with the chipmunk characters. The play is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which I'm not super familiar with outside of this movie like I was for Around the World in 80 Days from my Chipmunk Adventure retrospective. But, from what I understand, the scientist Dr. Jekyll, he uses a formula that turns him into the evil Mr. Hyde, a split identity for him with monstrous features. Sure, the Chipmunks and Chipettes have to improvise their own version of the story near the end of the movie, but generally there are some notable similarities. Of course, Theodore doesn't choose to become his monstrous form like Dr. Jekyll does, but he does use it to his advantage to do all the mean things he does, like I mentioned earlier. So his post-werewolf bite self in his daytime form with his hair combed back in a cool kind of way, that's Theodore's version of Mr. Hyde. All in all, I say Alvin and the Chipmunks Meet the Wolfman is one of the stronger films in the franchise. It's not quite the cinematic masterpiece that is The Chipmunk Adventure, partly because this film was never released in cinemas, it was direct-to-video, but I would strongly recommend it to anyone who wants to get more into the 80s chipmunk generation. Which also makes me realize, since this was the last animated project to use the 2D designs from the 80s series, Meet the Wolfman kind of marked the end of an era for the Chipmunks, and for what it was, I think it did so on a high note. Now, even if the partnership between Universal Studios and Bagdasarian Productions had continued, there is no guarantee that there would have been a third film to make this a complete trilogy. Although some fans do like to retroactively headcanon that they are the two sequels to The Chipmunk Adventure, which I personally disagree with, since the monster films don't really carry on any themes set up by The Chipmunk Adventure, but you can believe what you want. There have been numerous fan creations of what a third Alvin and the Chipmunks meet monster film would be like, and this is where I wanted to come back to the monsters themselves. Let me know in the comments if you would want the Chipmunks to go up against any other Universal movie monster. Which one would it be? I've heard Dracula is a popular choice, but I've also heard the idea of the Chipmunks meet the Invisible Man, or Chipmunks meet the Mummy tossed around. The Mummy would be pretty interesting in my opinion, but I guess it would necessitate a travel to Egypt, and while not universal monsters, I at one point thought of them meeting less humanoid cryptids like Mothman or the Chupacabra, but those would necessitate a travel to specific regions like West Virginia or Mexico/South Central United States. Alternatively, I would say that they could meet the creature from the Black Lagoon, but with that Easter egg I mentioned at the beginning of the movie, it really wouldn't make sense. Then again, maybe it's for the best that they stopped at 2 films, otherwise the franchise would have become more synonymous with finding monsters, and that's not what Alvin and the Chipmunks is about. Not to mention how contrived it would be to have to come up with explanations for why the Chipmunks are the only ones that encounter 3 monsters in a row on completely separate circumstances. Really, the rest of the world would know that monsters exist by then. Anyway, besides that monster question, feel free to let me know in the comments your thoughts on the film and how it has impacted you in its 20-year legacy. Don't forget that you're also welcome to like and subscribe, and doing so will let me know if you would like me to do a retrospective on Meet Frankenstein next year. The next retrospective is going to be the 5th anniversary of Road Chip, but I have another Chipmunk meme compilation and Sonic movie video before then. I might squeeze in another Chipmunk collaboration if I have time to spare, but other than that, I'm starting to wind down for the year and prepare for the winter break when I can have more time to work on videos. With all that said, happy Halloween, stay safe out there, especially this year. I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for your time.